Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander barefoot through the streets of a civilization so old and clever it'll make your smart thermostat feel insecure. You're standing in the Indus Valley. Yes, that place you vaguely remember from 6th grade. Surrounded by ancient bricks still cool under your feet, the air heavy with the scent of baked clay and something faintly sweet, like wet earth after rain. Bathing platforms stretch out in front of you, slabs of polished stone so pristine you could eat your dinner off them. Though, honestly, you probably won't survive this adventure long enough to feel hungry. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Mohenjo-Daro, one of the crown jewels of the Indus Valley. The streets here run in straight lines, and at nearly every corner you see a small stone stairway leading up to what looks like a shallow tub. You touch the edge, smooth, cool, worn by centuries of hands just like yours. These aren't just random basins. They're private bathing platforms, each attached to its own tiny drainage system. You step onto one and notice a channel carved neatly into the stone, leading away toward a larger gutter that runs under the street. It's so subtle you almost miss it. Mainstream history agrees that these platforms and drains allowed every household, yes, everyone, to wash daily in privacy without turning the street into a swamp. The water drained into covered sewers, flowing out toward the river. For a civilization that thrived more than 4,500 years ago, that's unnervingly civilized. Meanwhile, your own apartment's shower still leaks, doesn't it? But here's the quirky part. Some scholars believe these platforms were used for more than just cleaning bodies. You crouch down and see traces of pigment, red and ochre, embedded in the crevices. A few fringe theories suggest these could also have been used to mix dyes for textiles, or even for ritual cleansing ceremonies, complete with incense and chanting. Imagine your bathroom doubling as a mini temple with a little less toothpaste spit and a lot more gravitas. You shuffle along the street looking into more doorways. Every home has its own water supply. Wells, sunk deep into the earth, punctuate the courtyards. The well rims are ringed with perfectly fitted bricks. You dip a hand in, cold water greets you, surprisingly fresh for something trapped underground since before the invention of sliced bread. Historians still argue whether this meticulous water management was driven more by hygiene, religious custom, or simply practical needs in a hot climate. Some point to the ritualistic washing practices still present in parts of South Asia today as a hint. Others argue the urban planners just really hated muddy streets. Either way, you have to admit, it feels amazing to stand here in the dim torchlight, water gurgling gently, no puddles in sight. As you walk deeper into the city, you notice public bathhouses too. The most famous of these is the so-called Great Bath, a rectangular pool lined with bricks, surrounded by steps that lead down into the water. You climb down, your feet sinking slightly into the sand at the bottom. The walls are coated with a kind of ancient waterproof plaster that still holds. Still waterproof. You splash a little water at the corner and watch it bead up, smugly defying gravity and time. The bath is quiet now, but you can almost hear echoes of laughter, gossip, the splash of water as people once gathered here to cleanse themselves. Not just physically, but maybe spiritually too. Above your head, pigeons roost on the stone beams, cooing lazily as if they own the place. A breeze stirs through the ruined walls, carrying with it the smell of dust and faint salt from the nearby river. You look down at the reflection of the torchlight in the water and think about how this whole system, private bathing, drainage, water conservation, still works. Even now, if the modern pipes stopped running, you'd probably envy these ancient city dwellers for their foresight. A few steps away, you find a narrow manhole cover half shoved aside. You peek in and see the darkness of the sewer tunnels below, water trickling softly. Down there, baked bricks and stone channels guide the waste out of sight and smell. The air that rises from it isn't even that foul, comparatively speaking. And yes, in case you're wondering, they did have toilets too. Brick cubicles with sloping channels that carried everything away, cleanly and efficiently. You step into one, just to prove to yourself that you can, and it's actually not bad. In fact, it's better than a few gas station restrooms you've endured. What strikes you most, though, is how ordinary it feels here, how deeply human. Somewhere between the stone slabs and the faint lines of pigment and the soft splash of hidden water, you realize you're standing in a space that still works, not just mechanically, but also emotionally. And then a rat darts across your path, reminding you that, no matter how advanced your plumbing, nature still finds a way to crash the party. You chuckle quietly to yourself, stepping back out into the street, brushing dust off your hands, feeling oddly clean despite it all. Remember this moment. These people didn't just survive, they thrived, with bathrooms and drains and water systems that put your modern setup to shame. And tomorrow, when your landlord says they can't get anyone to fix it until next week, maybe just imagine what these ancient engineers would say. Probably something like, really, next week. You wander on, feet crunching over brick, past another bathing platform, and another, each one still quietly fulfilling its purpose after thousands of years. You keep walking, letting the rhythm of your feet fall into sync with the neat geometry of the street. The glow of torchlight catches on something square and polished at the next intersection, small stone cubes, arranged in tidy rows atop a low platform. At first, you think they're just decorative, but then you pick one up and feel its heft, solid, perfectly balanced, satisfyingly cool against your skin. These are the standardized weights and measures of the Indus Valley. You roll one of the cubes in your palm and realize it is perfect. You could stack these into a tower without it leaning so much as a hair's breadth. Even today, those cubes still conform uncannily well to modern metric scales. The largest ones, used for bulk commodities like grain or textiles, sit heavy and squat. Smaller ones, delicate enough to measure gold dust or spices, gleam faintly, as though they were just carved yesterday. Mainstream history tells us these weights were part of an intricate trade system that stretched far beyond the Indus Valley. Merchants here traded beads, cotton, pottery, and copper tools as far as Mesopotamia, maybe even Egypt. And to make sure no one got cheated, they relied on these precise weights, cut from chert and often marked with subtle notches to denote their value. You set the cube down and glance around. Behind you, stacked neatly on a ledge, are rulers, not the plastic kind from your school days, but slats of ivory, bone, and shell inlaid with faint black markings. Their smallest gradations measure as little as 1.7 millimeters, which is uncomfortably more precise than you'd ever bother to be when hanging a picture frame. Yet historians still argue whether this obsession with precision was strictly about commerce, or if it also had ritual or symbolic significance. Some fringe theories even suggest these weights doubled as charms or talismans to ward off bad deals. Imagine tucking a tiny cube into your robe to keep the spirits of dishonesty at bay. Cute, in a vaguely paranoid kind of way. You move to the next stall, if you can even call it that, and see a low table covered in seals and tokens, each carved with elaborate animal motifs and symbols. A merchant's toolkit, perhaps. You pick up a seal, press it into the dust, and see the raised impression it leaves behind, a unicorn-like creature surrounded by cryptic signs. You smile, because it's nice to know even thousands of years ago, branding was a thing. All around you, the marketplace comes to life in your imagination. The shouts of merchants bargaining over beads, the slap of sandals on brick, the pungent scent of spice mingling with river air. You watch a trader weigh a sack of barley, his hands deftly stacking those cubes you admired earlier, his eyes flicking up occasionally to ensure you don't pilfer anything. You crouch beside a low stone shelf lined with copper and bronze ingots. The metal catches the torchlight in dull flashes, and beside them, smaller stones marked with lines. These may have served as early contracts or counting stones, ensuring nobody walked away without paying their fair share. Historians still haven't entirely agreed on whether those marked stones were personal receipts or communal tallies. One fringe detail that tickles you is the story of a tiny weight, no bigger than your thumbnail, that somehow found its way into a Mesopotamian ruin thousands of miles from here, suggesting that at least some merchants traveled farther than your last vacation. You can't help but imagine some poor trader dropping it halfway across the world, and then having to explain the discrepancy in his inventory to a very grumpy supervisor. You pick up another ruler and squint at its faint etchings. They're so fine, so exact. Modern archaeologists have measured surviving Indus rulers and found them accurate to within a millimeter, which is both impressive and a little unsettling, given that your own kitchen tape measure is currently held together with duct tape. Behind you, you notice a faint rustling, perhaps just the wind through the ruins, but it feels like the echo of those merchants, busy at their ledgers, weighing, measuring, bargaining. The stones and tools here still feel alive, still calibrated, as though they're just waiting for you to finish up your shopping. You idly stack a few more cubes into a tiny pyramid, and then knock it over with the tip of your finger. The clatter seems to wake a pigeon in the rafters, which glares down at you with disdain. Maybe it's just the weight of time pressing down, but you swear it's judging your clumsy stacking skills. Further along, you come to a wall with faint carvings showing a procession of what look like merchants, each carrying bundles, and you run your hand over the stone, feeling the tiny grooves under your fingertips. This, you think, was a civilization that cared enough to carve their business dealings into eternity. Somewhere in the distance, a faint splash from the Great Bath reminds you of the perfect drainage system you marveled at earlier. The entire city seems to hum with quiet order, weights balanced, stones aligned, every grain of barley accounted for. Before you move on, you pocket one of the tiniest cubes for a second, weighing it in your palm, just to feel the ancient symmetry. Then, with a soft laugh at yourself, because honestly, you wouldn't last a day here without getting swindled, you set it back on the stack and step forward into the next shadowy street. Behind you, the cubes glint faintly in the torchlight, silently daring the modern world to do better. You step away from the marketplace, leaving behind the quiet watch of the cubes and rulers, and follow the curve of the street towards something much larger, looming at the edge of town. The air grows cooler here, and there's a faint scent of dust and grain mixed with something sweetly vegetal, like dry hay in the back of a barn. Ahead, the brick walls rise higher than anything you've seen so far, forming what looks like a vast warehouse, its shadow stretching across the street. You pause at the threshold of what scholars call the granary, or at least they think it was a granary. Historians still argue whether it was storage, a ceremonial hall, or even a marketplace. But as you step inside, you feel the temperature drop another degree, and that alone convinces you. This place was built to keep things cool. You walk slowly over the raised wooden floorboards. Well, what were floorboards? Now only their outlines remain in the dusty bricks. The entire structure rests on a series of air ducts, clever little channels that let the breeze from outside circulate beneath, keeping the stored grain dry and cool. You kneel and peer into one of the vents, feeling a faint draft even now, thousands of years later. Mainstream historians agree this was a place where surplus grain was collected and distributed, insurance against famine. The sheer scale of it boggles your mind. Room after room of brick-lined chambers, high ceilings to keep the air moving, ramps for carts to roll up and unload their sacks. You can almost hear the low murmur of workers heaving bags onto their shoulders, the rhythmic scrape of grain being swept into piles. In the far corner, a quirky detail catches your eye, a hollowed-out pit, lined with smooth stones with tiny dark stains at the bottom. Some fringe theories suggest this wasn't just for storage, but also for processing grain, perhaps pounding it into flour or soaking it in water before drying. You lean over and sniff, half expecting to smell wheat or barley. Instead, just the cool scent of old stone greets you. Above, faint carvings of animals, bulls, ibex, and something that suspiciously resembles a camel line the beams. It's as if the builders left little hints about what this building guarded. You imagine the scenes: herds of zebu cattle being led to market, farmers stacking sacks of millet and barley, children sneaking handfuls of grain to chew on while nobody's watching. You brush your hand along one wall and notice how smooth the bricks feel. Fired, of course, just like those from the houses you passed earlier, each one carefully measured and aligned. Historians still debate whether the granary was used by the state to control food supply or managed by local guilds. Some fringe suggestions even propose it doubled as a temple storehouse, blending the spiritual and the practical, with priests blessing each load before it was distributed. Toward the back, a doorway leads into another chamber, darker and even cooler. You step inside, and your breath puffs white in the faint chill. This feels like cold storage in the truest sense, a natural refrigerator, designed to keep perishables from spoiling long before anyone thought to invent electric freezers. The floor here is sunken slightly, with drains at the corners, and you imagine it lined with layers of straw, pottery jars filled with oil or pickled vegetables, baskets of fruit, bundles of onions and garlic. You reach down and trace one of the drains, marveling again at how water and air were managed so elegantly in this city. Somewhere in the rafters above you, a bird rustles, probably an owl this time, reminding you that even cold storage can't keep everything out. You smile faintly at the thought, ancient people battling the same critters you still find in your pantry. As you stand there, a breeze drifts in from the vents, and you swear it carries with it the faintest scent of grain. Maybe just your imagination, or maybe some tiny remnant of history lodged in the stones. You make your way back toward the entrance, feeling the warmth of the street return to your skin. Behind you, the granary looms, massive and quiet, its air vents whispering softly, its walls still patiently holding the chill of centuries. It's humbling, really, to think that thousands of years before refrigerated trucks and air-conditioned warehouses, these people were already building structures that could protect food against heat, spoilage, and pests. And yet here you are, still throwing away half the lettuce you buy every week. You give the building a last, respectful glance before moving on. The granary doesn't seem to mind your irreverence. It's seen worse. Besides, the stones seem to say, at least you didn't spill the barley. And as you walk down the next street, you feel the faint brush of cool air at your back, as though the building itself is gently shooing you along. Time to see what other secrets the city has kept waiting. The air shifts as you leave the grain district behind. A hint of salt rides on the breeze now, and you hear, faint at first but growing louder, the rhythmic lapping of water. The brick streets slope downward, and the ground under your feet is slicker here, polished by centuries of bare feet, and perhaps even by cartwheels hauling who knows what toward the docks. You follow the sound until it opens before you, the great dockyards of Lothal. Here the Indus Valley shows off yet another trick, maritime engineering so advanced you half expect to see a cruise ship pull in. The dock basin stretches wide, its walls lined with massive fired bricks fitted so tightly together you could slide a credit card between them. If you had a credit card in 2400 BCE. Standing on the edge, you can see the basin floor far below. It's dry now, but you can imagine it full of water, boats bobbing gently, ropes creaking. Even the steps leading down are slightly concave in the middle, worn smooth by the feet of sailors and dockhands. Mainstream historians will tell you that this was one of the world's first known tidal dockyards. The engineers here somehow understood the complex dance of the tides and built the basin just high enough that seawater could flood in at high tide and drain out completely at low tide, leaving behind a dry floor for loading and repairs. And you standing here, torch in hand, have to admit that's pretty clever. But then you notice something odd. Faint grooves cut into the bricks at regular intervals. Some fringe theories suggest these may have been guides for wooden beams, creating a kind of adjustable gate or sluice to control the water even more precisely. Maybe they even funneled silt away so the basin never clogged. Or maybe, and this one's your favorite, they just liked making things complicated to impress their neighbors upriver. You walk along the dock, and at intervals you see mooring posts, thick stone pillars, some of them still bearing faint ropes carved into their sides. You pause at one, tracing the worn circle at the top where countless ropes must have pulled taut, holding boats steady while goods were loaded and unloaded. Historians still argue whether the boats here were deep-hulled ships capable of crossing the Arabian Sea or just sturdy river barges meant for inland trade. Some carvings show slender reed boats, while others seem to depict heavier craft with sails. Either way, they were clearly onto something. You take a deep breath and swear you can still smell it, the briny tang of seawater, the faint scent of wet wood and tar, the acrid edge of copper being unloaded in crates. The whole place hums with the ghost of activity. Along the far wall, you find a low platform where bundles of goods would have been stacked, jars of oil, bales of cotton, baskets of beads and shells. You imagine workers moving briskly, shouting instructions, wiping sweat from their brows. Someone, probably more than one someone, always checking the weights you saw earlier to make sure no one tried to sneak off with a few extra jars of grain. At the corner of the basin, you spot another quirky detail. A series of shallow holes carved into the brickwork, perfectly aligned in two parallel rows. Some say these were posts for a roof shelter where merchants could negotiate deals out of the sun. Others insist they were part of an elaborate crane system for hauling heavy loads. You lean down, peer into one of the holes and find nothing but the whisper of wind and maybe a very annoyed spider. You climb down the steps into the basin itself. The walls loom on either side, high and imposing, but here in the quiet, you can see how they're ever so slightly slanted, intentionally, to prevent collapse and to allow water pressure to distribute evenly. You run your hand along the base of the wall and notice faint channels cut into the corners, drainage paths to prevent standing water from stagnating. Even here, at the very bottom of the dock, the builders thought of everything. And then you pause because you've heard something move. Just a soft plop somewhere in the shadows like a fish or, if you're unlucky, a snake. You freeze. Then slowly you realize it's probably nothing. Still, you move back toward the steps just a little faster than you came down. You climb out and find yourself standing on the upper promenade again, looking out toward where the river meets the sea. The distant horizon is painted in inky black now, but in your mind's eye you can see ships coming and going, sails full of wind, lanterns swinging. There's something incredibly comforting about this place, a reminder that even thousands of years ago, humans wanted to see what was beyond the horizon, that they built things, massive, clever things, to help them get there. You lean against one of the mooring posts and imagine the arguments that must have happened here. Merchants accusing sailors of damage, sailors accusing merchants of underpaying, everyone yelling over the roar of the tide. And somewhere up above, maybe the city planners watching all of it, silently amused, knowing that no matter what, the dock would hold. When you finally turn away, you swear you hear the faint creak of a rope, the sigh of a sail catching wind. But it's probably just your imagination. Probably. You head back toward the streets, the dockyard fatting behind you. The bricks under your feet are still damp, and you catch yourself glancing over your shoulder one last time. The basin glows faintly in the torchlight, silent and empty but somehow still alive, still waiting for the next ship to come home. You leave the salty air of the dockyards behind, though it clings stubbornly to your hair and clothes, and begin to wander back into the heart of the city. The streets here are quieter, narrower, and cooler. Before long you hear another sound, not the distant murmur of trade, not the creak of ropes or the splash of water against stone, but a constant musical trickling. You follow it. Soon you're standing at the edge of a public well, one of dozens scattered across the city. The well is ringed with stone, its bricks smooth from thousands of hands drawing water day after day. A rope and wooden bucket still dangle into the inky blackness below. You lean over cautiously and feel a cool draft rise up, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh earth and minerals. You can see your reflection in the water far below, rippling and shimmering in the faint torchlight. Mainstream history tells us these wells were one of the reasons this civilization thrived where others might have dried up and blown away. Every neighborhood had its own water supply. The wells were dug deep enough to tap into the water table, lined with fired bricks so they wouldn't collapse or contaminate. You watch as a young woman, well, you imagine her, hauls a bucket up and pours water into a stone channel. The water runs away, zigzagging into the street, where it disappears into a covered drain. You trace it with your eyes, realizing these channels crisscross the city, ensuring water reached homes, baths, gardens. You kneel to touch the flow, and the water feels so clean it almost startles you. Historians still argue whether these public wells were communal property, privately maintained, or controlled by religious authorities. You smirk as you imagine a bureaucrat in a loincloth demanding to see your water-fetching permit. You straighten up and wander down a street lined with more wells, some shallow and meant for washing, others much deeper and cooler. You find one in the courtyard of a large home and can't resist lowering the bucket yourself. It takes longer than you expect, and when you finally pull it up, the water sparkles faintly, impossibly clear. You sip, cold and just slightly sweet, as if the earth itself is rewarding you for your effort. But it wasn't just the wells. All along the streets, you notice little channels carved into the paving stones, guiding water toward gardens and smaller courtyards. Occasionally, you pass large troughs where animals would have been watered, and at intersections, larger public basins glint in the torchlight, places for filling jars, washing clothes, or simply cooling off on a hot day. At one corner, you discover a curious little fountain, no higher than your knee. The water seems to bubble up through a clay pipe and trickle into a shallow dish before draining away. Some fringe theorists argue these were early decorative features, proof that even then, people enjoyed a little luxury. You let your fingers dangle in it and decide they're probably right. Further down the street, you find another well with a half-collapsed cover. You peer inside and faint outlines of steps spiral downward along the walls, an ancient stepwell. Here, you wouldn't even need a bucket. You could simply walk down, scoop up what you needed, and climb back out. The more you look, the more you notice how seamlessly water was integrated into every part of the city. The streets are gently sloped so runoff flows naturally into drains, which lead into larger channels, which lead into the river. No stagnant puddles, no foul smells, just quiet, efficient motion. You pass another courtyard where someone, you imagine an old man with a long beard, is splashing his face and hands before sitting down to eat. A ritual repeated so many times in this city, it's practically embedded in the stones. At one point, you stop to catch your breath and hear a faint chittering from the shadows. Rats, no doubt. But even they seem healthier than the ones you've seen in modern cities, perhaps because the drains here actually worked. Historians still debate how much of this water management was purely practical and how much was spiritual. Some argue that the constant cleansing, the flowing of water, the deliberate absence of filth all hint at deeper cultural or religious meaning. Maybe clean streets weren't just nice, they were necessary for keeping the favor of the gods. You stand at yet another well, feeling the smoothness of the bricks under your fingers, and smile to yourself. It's strange how comforting it is to know that water has been flowing here, quietly and without drama, for thousands of years. Somewhere down the street you hear laughter, your imagination, surely, and the slap of wet feet on brick. You can almost see children running between the wells, splashing each other, earning annoyed looks from their mothers. You crouch down at the edge of one last well and gaze into its depths again. The water below still glimmers faintly, undisturbed. The bucket sways slightly in the breeze, creaking softly. You dip your fingers into the trough beside you, letting a single drop fall back in and ripple outward. And you think about how much of this world is still here, waiting for someone to notice. Then you rise and continue walking, your footsteps echoing in the narrow street, the sound of trickling water following you like a quiet applause. You drift back into the heart of the city now, letting the trickle of the wells fade behind you, replaced by the quiet authority of brick underfoot. Everywhere you go, you can't help but notice it. The walls, the streets, the steps, even the drains, all built from the same warm, reddish bricks, each one rectangular and oddly perfect. You stop to press your palm against one. It's still cool despite the heat of the day and smooth to the touch. Fired brick. You probably don't spend much time thinking about bricks, unless you've ever tried to assemble IKEA furniture and thought, well, at least it's not masonry. But here in the Indus Valley, they thought about bricks a lot. Mainstream history tells us that these fired bricks were one of the secrets to their durability. While many ancient civilizations relied on sun-dried mud bricks that crumbled under heavy rains or earthquakes, the Indus people fired their bricks in kilns at high temperatures. The result? Something close to ceramic, hard, water-resistant, and more uniform than most things in your modern apartment. You crouch to examine a section of street where the bricks have chipped just enough to reveal their layers, slight color variations, and the faint scent of earth still clinging to them after thousands of years. You trace the edges and notice something curious. The bricks here are all exactly twice as long as they are wide and about half as thick. This ratio, sometimes called the Indus proportion, wasn't just aesthetic. It made the bricks stronger and easier to stack neatly. Historians still argue whether that was just smart engineering or if the dimensions carried symbolic meaning as well. Around the corner, you find a small house partially intact. The walls still stand shoulder high, and you can see where a doorway would have been, its lintel marked by stones polished smooth by countless hands. You step through and feel the space shift. It's cooler, more intimate. Even now, the bricks keep the heat at bay, creating a pocket of shade and silence. You can see faint marks on the floor, probably where furniture once stood, and a faint line of darker bricks where a hearth used to glow. There's even a kind of brick bench running along one wall, smooth and worn from years of sitting. You sit for a moment yourself, imagining what it would have been like. A family gathered here, cool air trickling through the narrow windows, someone cooking over the hearth, the smell of bread rising. Then you notice something quirky. On one wall, the bricks form a tiny alcove no larger than a shoebox, with a shallow bowl of fired clay embedded into the brickwork. Some fringe theories suggest these niches weren't just shelves but little shrines, where families placed offerings to household deities or ancestors. You can almost picture a tiny lamp flickering there, casting golden light across the room. You move outside again, running your hands along the walls as you walk. The bricks are so consistent, so unyielding, that you start to feel a little inadequate in your modern drywall and plaster world. Somewhere in the distance you hear a faint crack, maybe just a bird landing on the roof of a ruin, but it reminds you that even stone has its limits. At one intersection, you find a large pile of bricks that seem never to have been assembled, stacked neatly as if the workers just left for lunch and never came back. You pick one up. It's heavier than it looks, and notice faint marks on one side. Some of the bricks here were stamped with symbols or signs, perhaps to mark which kiln produced them or which batch they belonged to. One scholar even suggested these marks might have been a kind of quality control. As you set the brick down again, you notice how each building seems to hum in harmony with the others. Because they all use the same size and ratio of brick, everything fits together, from the largest granary to the tiniest drain cover. It's easy to forget that these people lived in an area prone to flooding and earthquakes. And yet the city still stands, quiet testimony to the fact that they figured out how to build not just for beauty, but for survival. You wander back toward the main street and pass by another house where a section of wall has collapsed just enough to reveal the layers of bricks inside. They're stacked in a kind of staggered pattern called a stretcher bond, which gives the wall strength. You shake your head and laugh softly, because even here, even now, it still holds together better than the fence you put up last summer. Historians still debate whether the uniformity of the bricks came from centralized control, some master planner dictating standards, or simply from shared knowledge passed down through generations of builders. Either way, it clearly worked. As you walk further, the sunlight catches the corner of a wall, and you swear it seems to glow faintly, the bricks warming in the light like sleeping embers. You pause to sit on a low ledge and let your hand drift along the edge of a brick, feeling the grooves and imperfections, imagining the hands that molded it, set it, and tapped it into place. You wonder what they would think if they knew you'd come all this way just to admire their handiwork. Probably something along the lines of, well, at least you noticed. And as you stand and stretch, you glance back at the streets lined with bricks, walls rising, paths stretching out straight and true, drains gurgling quietly below. Everything still exactly where it's meant to be. You stretch your back, feeling the warmth of the bricks fade from your fingers, and start walking again, this time paying more attention to the ground beneath your feet. Something about it feels intentional. The way the streets meet at right angles, the way every alley seems to open into a courtyard at just the right spot. It hits you slowly. You're walking through a city planned so precisely it makes modern suburbs look like spaghetti dropped on a plate. You pause at a corner where two wide streets intersect perfectly, their bricks neatly aligned, gutters running along both sides. From here, you can see how the streets stretch straight into the distance, lined with identical houses on either side. Even the smallest alleys are just wide enough for a cart to pass through without scraping the walls. Mainstream historians agree. The Indus Valley was among the first civilizations to implement urban grid planning. The whole city was designed on a system of blocks, divided into residential, commercial, and public spaces. You imagine someone, perhaps with a reed pen in hand, sitting under a tree all those centuries ago, sketching the blueprint for a city that still makes sense today. You take a right turn, then another. Sure enough, you find yourself back where you started without even trying. It's so easy to navigate here that you almost expect to see street signs. You pass by a raised platform, a kind of plaza where the grid opens into a wider space. Maybe this was a marketplace or a meeting spot. You stop and look around, imagining the chatter of merchants and shoppers spilling into the streets, their footsteps echoing against the walls. But it's not just practical, it's beautiful too. The bricks alternate colors here and there, creating subtle patterns. A fringe theory suggests that this wasn't just aesthetic flair but also a kind of wayfinding system. Darker bricks indicating major routes, lighter bricks marking minor ones. You crouch down and run your hand over them, feeling the faint ridges where time has worn them down. As you walk again, you notice how the streets are gently sloped to allow water to drain away naturally. Even the alleyways have tiny gullies carved along the sides. You pass one spot where two drains converge and peek down to see water still trickling quietly, just as it was meant to. Historians still argue whether this level of planning was coordinated by a central authority or if it emerged more organically, neighborhood by neighborhood agreeing to stick to a common sense of order. But standing here, with every line straight, every corner square, you find it hard to believe it wasn't intentional. You stop to watch a small lizard scurry across the street and disappear into a crack in the bricks. Even it seems to follow the pattern of the grid, darting from shadow to shadow like it knows the rules. Farther along, you find a section where the city planners clearly thought of everything. Here, a raised walkway runs alongside the street, keeping pedestrians above the muck when it rains. On the opposite side, a small stairway leads down to a drainage channel wide enough to clean easily but narrow enough to cover when needed. You sit for a moment on the steps, imagining people bustling past you, traders, children, priests, all moving gracefully through the grid like pieces on a board. You can't help but chuckle, thinking of how often you've gotten lost in modern cities where streets curve aimlessly and signs seem designed to confuse. Here, everything just works. You stand and start walking again, noticing how even the houses follow the same logic. Most have their doors opening onto side streets, keeping the main avenues clear. The homes are all roughly the same size, modest but functional, with inner courtyards open to the sky and walls that rise just high enough to give privacy without blocking light. As you wander deeper into the grid, you find yourself in what must have been a more upscale area. The bricks here are a little smoother, the street a little wider, the drains a little better hidden. Even here, though, the proportions stay true to the grid. And then you find something quirky, a house with a staircase built right into the exterior wall, leading to a flat roof. Scholars have long debated what these rooftops were for: sleeping in the cool evening air, drying grain, hosting neighborhood gossip sessions. You climb halfway up, the bricks warm under your hands, and look out over the rooftops of the city. From here, the grid reveals itself fully, a patchwork of perfect rectangles stretching out to the horizon, intersected by straight streets and dotted with wells and courtyards. You can almost feel the quiet pride of the builders in every line. Somewhere nearby, a breeze picks up, and you catch the faint scent of water from the wells and perhaps a whiff of something sweet baking in one of the courtyards. You sit on the top step for a moment longer, letting your eyes follow the neat patterns below. Even now, even after thousands of years, this place feels alive, still ready to welcome new footsteps, still waiting for its streets to fill again. And when you climb back down and step back onto the street, you notice something you didn't before: the soft hum of the grid beneath your feet. Everything where it should be, everything leading you forward. You keep walking now, deeper into the city grid, until the buildings begin to change. The homes here seem smaller, the walls a little plainer, but something about the air feels electric. You notice faint glimmers of color here and there, tiny beads scattered in the dust, shimmering faintly in the torchlight like little stars. You stoop to pick one up, and it rolls coolly between your fingers, a deep carnelian red, smooth and perfectly round. You've just found one of the Indus Valley's most dazzling inventions, their beads. This whole neighborhood seems dedicated to the craft. You follow a narrow alley and come upon a workshop, or what remains of it. Long, low benches line the walls, still littered with shards of stone and faint grooves where tools once scraped and shaped. The floor is dusty, but if you look closely, you can see more beads lying here and there. Agate, carnelian, faience, even tiny bits of gold. Mainstream history acknowledges the Indus beadmakers as some of the finest artisans of their age. They drilled holes so tiny through stones, so hard you're left blinking at the sheer patience of it all. Some of these beads even found their way to Mesopotamia, over 2,000 miles away. You can almost hear a merchant in Ur gasping. You paid how much for that little red pebble? You notice a peculiar stone slab embedded in the floor, covered in faint circular grooves. Some fringe theorists believe these were polishing stones, where the beads were spun and smoothed. You lean closer and imagine the rhythmic scraping of hundreds of beads being shaped here day after day, a soft chorus of craft. On the workbench, a set of delicate stone drills still sits, thin rods of flint or copper, meant for boring into the hardest stones imaginable. You pick one up and realize just how fragile they seem. And yet somehow, they drilled through quartz with millimeter-perfect precision. Historians still argue how they achieved such tiny perforations without modern tools or diamond-tipped bits. You pocket a tiny broken bead and keep walking. Further down the street, you find a whole room set up with little kilns. The walls here are blackened from smoke, and the floor is littered with chunks of faience, an early glass-like material made from crushed quartz and colored with copper. You run your thumb over a blue-green shard and feel a faint grit, almost like sugar. One corner of the room holds a pile of discarded beads, irregular, cracked, or misshapen. Even these have a strange beauty to them. You pick up a pinkish one and hold it to the torchlight, watching it glow faintly like a captured sunset. The air here smells different too, drier, tinged with something metallic. You can almost taste it. You step outside again and find yourself in another courtyard. Here, a long, shallow trough runs the length of the wall, likely used for washing and sorting beads after they were shaped. You splash your fingers in the faint puddle at the bottom and imagine the glint of hundreds of beads tumbling in water, catching the light. A pigeon coos from above, and for a moment you think of all the thousands, maybe millions, of beads that pass through this workshop, ending up in necklaces, bracelets, anklets, sewn into garments, even buried with their owners as treasures for the next life. It strikes you how human this all feels, how someone, thousands of years ago, sat where you're standing, squinting at a bead between their fingers, muttering about its imperfections and starting again. Historians still debate whether bead making was reserved for an elite artisan class, or if it was more of a family trade, handed down through generations. Either way, you sense a quiet pride embedded in every shard of stone. You pick up a tiny, almost invisible bead that must have slipped through a crack long ago. It feels impossibly light, impossibly precise. You laugh softly, imagining how many hours it must have taken to make something so small it would get lost between the floorboards today. And then you notice one more oddity, a strange, almost circular imprint in the wall. Some fringe scholars believe it could have held a kind of catalog, a display of finished beads to entice buyers, shimmering in rows like a prehistoric jewelry counter. You stand back and take it all in, the benches, the shards, the kilns, the troughs. Even in ruin, the workshop radiates focus, patience, and quiet artistry. When you finally turn to leave, you feel a faint crunch underfoot and realize you're still walking over beads scattered in the dust. You smile and whisper an apology to the long-gone artisans, promising not to pocket too many souvenirs. And as you step back into the street, the faint sparkle of forgotten beads seems to follow you, winking in the torchlight, as if to say, beauty this fine never really disappears. You leave the beadmaker's quarter behind, brushing the last grains of colored dust from your hands, and make your way toward another part of the city. The air feels warmer here, thicker somehow, and you notice faint marks on the street, dark streaks, as if something hot once dripped and pooled here. It isn't long before you hear the soft clang of metal on stone. You round a corner and find yourself staring at an ancient foundry, or what remains of one, a low, squat building with an open courtyard blackened from years of smoke. At its center sits a brick furnace, cracked now but still intimidating, with shallow pits and channels radiating outward like a sunburst. You step closer, feeling the warmth of the stones under your feet, even though they haven't seen a fire in millennia. This was the city's metallurgical heart, where copper and bronze were smelted, shaped, and forged into tools, ornaments, and who knows what else. Mainstream history credits the Indus Valley with widespread copper and bronze usage, blades, chisels, fishhooks, mirrors. Even delicate needles and razors were fashioned here. You can almost see the copper gleaming faintly in the torchlight, half molten, flowing into molds. You crouch by the furnace and notice the faint shine of slag still fused to the brickwork, waste from the smelting process, but beautiful in its own right, glittering like dark glass. Some fringe theorists suggest this slag was sometimes used decoratively, crushed and sprinkled into clay to strengthen or beautify pots. A nice little example of waste not long before it became trendy. On a nearby shelf you find remnants of crucibles, small clay bowls blackened inside from holding molten metal. You pick one up, still gritty with ash, and marvel at how light it is. Yet this humble thing once held liquid fire hot enough to melt stone. At the far wall, you notice rows of clay molds stacked haphazardly, each one carved to cast a specific object: a blade, a fishhook, a mirror. Some of the molds are cracked and pitted, but the outlines are still crisp enough that you can picture the finished piece in your mind. Historians still argue over how exactly the Indus metallurgists managed their furnaces, whether they blew air in with bellows or used clever chimney designs to feed the flames. You stand by the furnace and feel a faint draft rising through the ancient flue, whispering past your cheek as if in answer. You wander over to a workbench littered with stone hammers and worn copper chisels. One of the hammers still has faint notches where it struck something harder than itself. You pick it up, feel its balance, and imagine the ringing sound it made when it hit hot metal, sparks dancing in the air. One quirky detail catches your eye near the corner, a pile of broken bangles made entirely of bronze. Not utilitarian tools, but jewelry, fashionable and gleaming. Some fringe researchers even believe these bronze bangles were status symbols, worn as much for display as for function. You slip one over your wrist and chuckle softly. It's surprisingly comfortable if a little warm. The walls are covered in faint soot patterns, almost like cave art, ghostly echoes of flame and shadow. You wonder how many workers stood here at a time, sweating and shouting over the roar of the furnace, passing molten metal back and forth with practiced ease. In a shallow pit nearby, you find more slag mixed with fragments of copper ore and bits of charcoal. You pick up a piece and feel its weight, dense, sharp, and still faintly metallic even after all these centuries. Historians still debate whether these foundries produced strictly utilitarian tools for the city or whether they also exported finished goods to faraway lands. Some artifacts found in Mesopotamia appear suspiciously similar to the work done here, suggesting the reach of these artisans extended far beyond what the quiet streets would have you believe. You stand back for a moment, letting your eyes wander over the room. The furnace at the center, the mold stacked neatly, the slag glittering in the corners. It feels alive, warm and humming with memory. A faint breeze picks up, swirling ash-smelling dust around your feet, and you half expect to see someone step from the shadows to stoke the coals. But it's just you. You place the bronze bangle carefully back on the pile, give the furnace one last respectful nod, and turn toward the exit. The street outside seems brighter now, cooler. And as you walk away, you can almost hear the faint ring of hammer on anvil, echoing from somewhere behind you, soft and steady, like a heartbeat buried in stone. You emerge from the warmth of the foundry into cooler air, letting the ringing of hammers fade into the distance. Ahead, the city seems to open up, the narrow streets giving way to a spacious courtyard dotted with stone benches. The sound of water returns, not the soft trickle of wells this time, but a deliberate splash and ripple, echoing off the brick walls around you. You've arrived at one of the Indus Valley's public baths. It's impossible to miss. A massive rectangular pool sunken into the ground, lined with smooth bricks, each one still snug in its place despite thousands of years of weather and wear. You walk slowly along its edge, peering down into the basin. The water is long gone, of course, but you can almost see it glinting below, perfectly still and inviting. Mainstream history hails this as one of the earliest examples of a public bathhouse, a place not just for washing, but perhaps for ritual purification, socializing, and even city ceremonies. You step down the stairs at one end of the pool. The bricks are cool and slightly slick underfoot, as though they remember being wet. At the bottom, the space feels hushed, as if the air itself has thickened in deference to the rituals that once took place here. Around the walls, small alcoves suggest spaces for changing clothes or storing personal items. You run your fingers along the ledges and imagine towels and jars of scented oil waiting there, ready for bathers. On one side of the pool, you find a series of cleverly disguised holes, drains connected to a hidden system of pipes below. Even when full, the bath could be emptied, cleaned, and refilled with fresh water without disrupting the rest of the city. Some fringe theorists argue that these baths weren't just for hygiene or spirituality, but also for health, like an ancient spa. After all, the water would have been cool and clean, and the whole atmosphere seems designed to calm the mind. You walk the length of the pool, noting how the bricks are slightly concave toward the middle to guide any remaining water to the drains. At the far end, you find an inlet where fresh water would have poured in, perhaps from one of the wells you saw earlier. Historians still debate how the water was heated, if it was heated at all. Some believe there were nearby furnaces that could warm the water before channeling it into the pool. Others argue it was always cool, perfect for the climate and for spiritual cleansing. A faint breeze sweeps through and you close your eyes, imagining the bath full of people. Quiet conversation murmurs across the water. A splash echoes as someone eases in. You can almost hear laughter, whispers, the low hum of a city gathering to shed its dust and weariness. Above you, faint decorative elements are still visible on the upper walls. Simple, geometric patterns etched into the bricks. Nothing extravagant, but somehow elegant in its restraint. You wander into one of the side rooms and discover another, smaller basin, likely for private bathing or for children. Even here, the drains and inlet work perfectly. It occurs to you that these baths might have been one of the city's great equalizers. Rich or poor, priest or farmer, everyone passed through here to cleanse themselves, to refresh and renew. You touch the edge of the basin and imagine the millions of hands that have done the same. Then you notice something peculiar. At one corner of the main pool, there's a faint outline of what looks like a carved animal, perhaps a bull or a unicorn. Some fringe scholars suggest this was symbolic, perhaps marking the sacred end of the pool. Or maybe it was just a bored artisan showing off. You smile at the thought. You climb back to the top of the steps and sit on the edge for a moment, looking down into the empty bath. The faint scent of stone and dust rises around you, cool and grounding. Historians still argue whether the baths were mandatory for certain ceremonies or just a nice luxury. But sitting here, you feel something more profound, a quiet reverence baked into the bricks themselves, as though the water once held stories, secrets, and absolutions for those who entered. You get up and walk around the perimeter one last time, noticing how the pool seems to glow faintly in the torchlight. The bricks catch the light just so, shimmering faintly like water even when dry. As you step away, you hear, just for a moment, the phantom splash of a bather diving in, the echo bouncing off the walls like a distant memory. You glance back over your shoulder, smiling faintly, and murmur a quiet promise to return. And as you wander back into the streets, the air feels cooler on your skin, as though the city itself has just washed you clean. You leave the bathhouse behind, feeling oddly refreshed despite the absence of water, and head back into the maze of streets. This part of the city seems quieter, the air still, as if it's holding its breath. The buildings around you are taller now, their walls closer together, casting long shadows across the bricks below. At first, you don't notice anything unusual, but then you catch a glimpse of something carved above a doorway, a strange little mark, like a cluster of lines and dots. You stop. It's a seal impression, faint but still sharp enough to recognize. And with that, you realize you've stumbled into another of the Indus Valley's quiet marvels, their writing system. You run your fingers lightly over the carving, a series of symbols, utterly alien to you but carved with care. A few more steps and you spot another, stamped into the bricks on a corner, and then another, etched into a slab lying by a doorway. Mainstream historians tell us these seals and inscriptions represent one of the earliest known writing systems, though no one alive today can actually read them. The Indus script remains undeciphered. You wander into a small room off the street where a pile of fired clay seals sits in the dust. Each one is about the size of your palm, and each is unique. Some bear lines of those same mysterious symbols. Others depict animals, bulls, tigers, fish, even a curious one-horned creature that shows up often enough you begin to wonder if they really had unicorns here. You pick up a seal and feel its weight, solid, satisfying. You press it lightly into the dirt at your feet and smile at the clear impression it leaves behind. These seals, you realize, weren't just decorative. They were practical too, used to stamp packages of goods, to mark property, to identify ownership, almost like a signature or a business card. On the wall, you notice faint scratches, practice marks perhaps, where someone once learned to carve these symbols. Some fringe theorists suggest that the script was more than a utilitarian tool, that it may have carried spiritual or magical significance, much like runes or charms in other ancient cultures. You pick up another seal from the pile. This one shows a row of symbols above a seated figure, possibly meditating. Historians still argue whether this figure represents an early deity, a shaman, or just someone very good at yoga before yoga was cool. Outside, you notice more of these symbols, scratched onto bricks, painted faintly on walls, even carved into a drain cover. Wherever you look, the city seems to whisper in this strange, unreadable language. You wander farther into the neighborhood and find a larger chamber, its walls covered with more elaborate inscriptions. Some of the tiles here are dyed with faint pigments, and you can almost make out red, blue, and black traces in the grooves. There's something oddly comforting about it. The idea that this was a city of writers and readers, that people cared enough to leave marks behind even though they knew nothing lasts forever. One quirky detail catches your eye near the back of the room, a row of tiny clay tokens, each marked with single symbols but shaped like animals. Some scholars speculate these could have been teaching aids or even a kind of game. You pick one up, a tiny turtle, and roll it between your fingers, imagining a child learning their letters this way. Historians still debate whether the Indus script was a fully developed language, a series of mnemonic symbols, or even a form of proto-writing, meant only for a select few to understand. You crouch near the door and scratch a few lines into the dirt yourself. Nothing meaningful, just shapes. But it feels oddly satisfying, like you're adding your own little secret to the long-forgotten story. When you rise, you take one last look at the seals scattered around you, some chipped and broken but still legible. You imagine merchants once pressing them into wet clay, officials handing them out, children playing with broken ones like toys. And you wonder what they would say if they knew their words still fill the air here, unread but not forgotten. You slip one of the smaller, cracked seals back into its place on the pile and step outside. The sunlight catches on another mark scratched faintly into the wall at the corner. You smile at it, tracing the lines one more time before walking away, letting the mysterious language fade quietly behind you. And though you don't understand a word of it, you can't help but feel as if the city has been speaking to you all along. You keep walking, the cryptic symbols still lingering in your mind like a half-remembered dream. The streets grow narrower again, and soon you hear a faint clatter, something rhythmic, hollow, echoing gently through the bricks. You follow the sound and come upon what looks at first like a series of small sheds or stalls lined up along the street. But as you draw closer, you see what's inside. Rows of perfectly shaped wheels, each mounted horizontally on a low stand. You found the potter's quarter. The scent here is different, earthier, dustier. The air carries the faint tang of clay and ash. You step into one of the stalls and run your fingers over a half-finished jar, its surface smooth and cool. Mainstream history credits the Indus Valley people with some of the finest pottery of their time, symmetrical, sturdy, and often decorated with elegant, minimalistic designs. You watch in your mind's eye as a potter sits cross-legged at a wheel, one hand steadying a lump of clay while the other shapes it as the wheel spins. You can almost hear the soft hiss of wet clay sliding under his palms, the quiet satisfaction when a perfect curve emerges. You move deeper into the workshop. Shelves along the walls still hold rows of pots, bowls, jars, cups, even small figurines. Some are simple and utilitarian. Others bear faint painted designs, zigzags, trees, animals. You can almost imagine a customer picking through these shelves, debating which jar will hold water best or which bowl will impress a dinner guest. One quirky detail catches your eye on a low shelf, a line of tiny, almost toy-sized vessels. Some fringe theorists argue these were used as measuring cups, others say they were offerings, and one particularly enthusiastic scholar suggested they were simply evidence that children, too, wanted to play Potter. You crouch near a wheel and give it a gentle spin. It turns smoothly, a soft whisper against the stone floor. Historians still argue whether the potters here worked for themselves, selling their wares directly to customers, or whether they produced standardized goods for the city under official oversight. Judging by the neat rows of identical jars you see on a nearby shelf, you suspect a bit of both. You pick up a cracked jar and hold it close, noting how thin the walls are and how even the lip has been smoothed to perfection. You set it down and spot something even stranger tucked into the corner, a mound of what looks like burnt clay figurines, bulls, humans, birds, broken but still recognizable. Some fringe researchers believe these figurines weren't decorative at all, but used in rituals, perhaps even as offerings that were intentionally shattered. You move on to another stall, where a kiln dominates the back wall. The mouth of the kiln is blackened, and the air still smells faintly of ash. You peer inside and see that even here, the bricks are arranged to channel heat evenly, another quiet testament to their engineering. On a nearby shelf, you find several unfired pieces, still dusty and fragile. Their surfaces are etched with faint designs you can barely make out. You run your finger along the grooves and wonder if these patterns held some symbolic meaning or were simply artistic flourishes. You sit down for a moment on a cool stone bench and watch the scene play out in your imagination. Potters at their wheels, children squatting nearby imitating them, someone stoking the kiln, and neighbors dropping by to collect an order or gossip about whose jar cracked in the heat. The simplicity of it all is comforting. You can imagine someone shaping a jar not just to carry water but to leave behind a piece of themselves, knowing that long after they were gone, the jar might still stand, waiting to be found, admired, and touched by a stranger. Historians still debate whether the motifs painted on the pottery, trees, animals, waves, were just decorative or if they carried deeper meanings, perhaps identifying the potter, the contents, or even the intended owner. You stand again and wander toward the far end of the workshop, where a pile of shards crunches under your feet. Broken pieces of bowls and jars, sharp and jagged, yet somehow beautiful in their ruin. You pick one up and hold it to the light, watching how the faint pattern catches your eye before setting it gently back down. On the wall, a faint carving seems to suggest a scene. A man at a wheel, hands poised over a jar, surrounded by onlookers. You smile, realizing even then they took pride in their craft and maybe liked to brag a little. As you leave the potter's quarter, the faint hum of turning wheels and the scent of clay seem to follow you. You glance back once more, half expecting to see a potter raise his head and wink at you before returning to his work. And as you step into the sunlit street again, the thought lingers in your mind. Every jar, every bowl, every tiny vessel was once clay in someone's hands, and in a way still is. The streets beyond the potter's quarter feel wider, quieter, almost expectant, as though you're approaching someplace important. The air shifts subtly, carrying a faint sweetness now, the scent of grains, dust, and perhaps something richer. You follow the gentle slope of the street until you reach a vast structure rising before you, taller than the surrounding houses, its walls thicker, its presence commanding without being ostentatious. You've arrived at what many historians believe to be the granary. It's enormous, a rectangular hall raised on a platform, its walls pierced with small vents for air, and its floor set with rows of brick pillars. You climb the shallow steps to the platform and step inside. The space feels cooler here. You stand in the middle, surrounded by stone columns, each about waist high, and imagine wooden planks laid across them to support massive heaps of grain above the cool air circulating below. Mainstream history suggests this was where the city stored its surplus: wheat, barley, maybe even lentils. The air vents and raised floor kept it dry and pest-free, a kind of ancient climate control system. You lean on one of the pillars and close your eyes. You can almost hear it, the soft rustle of sacks being carried in, the scrape of shovels, the faint crackle of grain shifting underfoot. On the far wall, you notice a ramp leading down to a lower chamber. You follow it and find yourself in a dim, narrow corridor lined with brick bins, their walls darkened from centuries of use. Here, too, you imagine sacks stacked to the ceiling, each one marked perhaps with a seal like the ones you saw earlier. Some fringe theorists have proposed more colorful uses for this place: a temple, a gathering hall, even a palace. But standing here amid the silent pillars and faint smell of earth, the idea of a granary feels just right: humble, vital, and quietly powerful. You step back into the main hall and notice something curious: faint painted lines on a few of the pillars. Perhaps once they were numbered or labeled, part of some long-forgotten system of inventory. You trace the marks with your fingers, imagining a clerk counting sacks by torchlight, muttering to himself as he scribbles marks on a wax tablet. On a shelf near the entrance, you find a broken clay scoop and what looks like a balance scale, small, but clearly intended to weigh out precise measures. You pick it up and tilt it, imagining the little weights swinging gently as grain is poured into a jar below. Historians still argue over who controlled this wealth. Was it managed by the city's elite, by a priestly class, or did neighborhoods each contribute and withdraw as needed? You wander toward the back of the hall, where the light grows dimmer, and find another set of stairs leading upward. At the top, you step out onto the roof, where the sun beats down and the city stretches out before you in a grid of perfect lines. From up here, the granary feels like the city's heart, not flashy, but steady, a place where the people's lives quite literally depended on what was stored within. You sit on the warm bricks of the roof for a moment, looking out at the streets below. Children dart through alleys, women carry jars of water home, merchants haggle in doorways, all of them unwittingly sustained by the quiet work that took place in this great storehouse. One quirky feature catches your eye on the far side of the roof: a row of tiny square holes in the wall. Some speculate they allow doves or pigeons to nest here, perhaps raised to carry messages or just to help keep the granary free of insects. You stand and walk back toward the steps, letting your hand glide over the sun-warmed bricks. As you descend, you hear, or think you hear, the faint shuffle of feet, the whisper of grain being poured, the murmur of voices counting out measures of wheat. Back in the main hall, you glance around one last time. The pillars stand like sentinels, and the air feels cool and still, heavy with the quiet promise of sustenance. You pause at the threshold, resting your hand on the stone doorframe, and think of the thousands of hands that have passed through here, carrying the weight of a harvest, ensuring the city's survival. Then you step outside, letting the sunlight wash over you again. And as you continue down the street, you can't help but feel that in some way, the city itself is still fed by the memory of what was stored here, a quiet abundance that echoes in every brick. You leave the granary behind, the faint memory of its cool shadows and quiet abundance still clinging to your senses. The sun is beginning its slow descent now, painting the bricks around you in warm gold and long, sleepy shadows. The streets begin to slope upward as you walk, and soon you find yourself approaching a broad flight of stone steps, flanked by carved walls that seem to shimmer faintly in the light. At the top, a large open platform awaits, an elevated mound of earth and brick rising high above the city. You climb slowly, feeling the heat of the stones through your soles, each step carrying you closer to the quiet mystery that sits atop it. You've arrived at what many believe to be the citadel, the raised area that dominates the skyline of Mohenjo-Daro. You reach the summit and pause to catch your breath. The air feels cooler up here, and the city below stretches out like a perfect grid, its streets and courtyards glowing faintly in the evening light. The citadel itself is a cluster of buildings, some larger, some smaller, but all built with the same meticulous care as the rest of the city. Their walls are thicker, the bricks slightly finer. Mainstream history suggests the citadel may have been an administrative center, a religious precinct, or both. A place for the city's elite to oversee its workings, perform rituals, or perhaps simply retreat from the bustle below. You wander toward the largest structure on the mound, its walls high and imposing, though not ostentatious. Inside, the air is cool and still. You step through a series of doorways and find yourself in a vast chamber with faint carvings on its walls, geometric shapes, and what might be stylized animals. Historians still argue whether these symbols were purely decorative, or if they held ceremonial significance, a kind of coded language meant only for the initiated. In a corner, you discover a staircase spiraling upward. You follow it until you emerge onto a rooftop terrace where the breeze finally catches your hair and cools your skin. The view from here is breathtaking. The city sprawled out below, the river shimmering faintly beyond, and the horizon bathed in the amber glow of sunset. You sit on the edge of the terrace and imagine what it must have been like to stand here thousands of years ago, looking out at the same streets, hearing the same hum of daily life rising from below. On the terrace, you find a peculiar feature, a row of niches cut into the walls, each just large enough to hold a small jar or offering. Some fringe theorists believe these were used for votive purposes, each niche holding a candle, a bowl of grain, or a figurine of a deity watching over the city. You crouch and peer into one of the niches, imagining a faint flicker of light dancing there, casting soft shadows on the walls. You wander back down the steps and explore another building on the citadel, this one smaller but more elaborate. Its walls are lined with shallow pools and channels, perhaps once filled with water. A private ritual space, a sanctuary, historians still debate. The faint scent of earth and stone fills your lungs as you run your fingers along the smooth brickwork, feeling the gentle coolness seep into your skin. You pass through yet another doorway and find a small courtyard at the heart of the citadel. Here, the bricks are arranged in intricate patterns, and the walls are etched with faint, almost playful designs, birds, fish, even what might be human figures dancing. One quirky feature catches your attention, a single brick at the center of the courtyard, slightly raised and marked with an unfamiliar symbol. Some suggest it might have been a marker for ceremonial gatherings, a spot where speeches were given or oaths sworn. You stand there for a moment, letting the weight of the place settle over you, the quiet authority of its walls, the faint echoes of footsteps that once paced its halls, the whisper of rituals that shaped the city's destiny. Historians still debate whether the citadel was a true seat of power or simply a spiritual heart for the people, a place to commune with gods, ancestors, or simply each other. As you walk back toward the steps, the sun dips lower, and the bricks seem to glow from within, holding onto the day's heat as if unwilling to let go. You descend slowly, savoring the faint crunch of sand and dust beneath your feet, glancing back now and then at the citadel rising proudly behind you, a quiet reminder of order, vision, and mystery. At the bottom, you pause one last time, looking up at the mound silhouetted against the darkening sky. And though you don't fully understand its secrets, you can't shake the feeling that the citadel still watches over the city, steady, silent, waiting for the next visitor to climb its steps and listen. The sun is now little more than a glowing sliver on the horizon as you wander down from the citadel, the stones still warm underfoot. The city streets have quieted. The faint echo of your footsteps seems to hang longer in the cooling air. You follow the shadows toward what looks like an open square flanked by a low stone wall. Beyond it, you spot what at first seems to be just another well, but as you approach, you see that this one is different. It's vast, much larger than any you've seen before, lined with perfectly cut bricks that descend deep into the earth. Even now, dry and silent, it commands respect. You've stumbled upon one of the Indus Valley's great forgotten inventions, the stepwell. You walk to its edge and look down. The steps descend in a precise, geometric pattern, zigzagging into darkness, the faint smell of damp earth rising up to greet you. Mainstream history acknowledges that these stepwells weren't just wells. They were gathering places, social hubs, and perhaps even ritual sites. You imagine people descending these steps every day, their chatter and laughter bouncing off the cool walls as they fetched water or simply sat and talked. You take a cautious step down, then another, and another, feeling the temperature drop as you descend into the cool embrace of the earth. The lower you go, the more hushed the world becomes. The sounds of the city fade, replaced by the quiet scrape of your feet on brick and the faint echo of your own breath. Halfway down, you pause and rest your hand on the wall. Here, you notice faint carvings, abstract patterns, spirals, and what might even be fish etched into the bricks. Some fringe theorists have suggested these were meant to honor the water spirits or simply to beautify the space where life-giving water could be found. You descend further until you reach the bottom. Here, the air is cool and damp, and you can almost hear the soft trickle of water that once pooled here, reflecting torchlight in a rippling dance. You close your eyes and imagine the stepwell full, its surface dotted with floating lamps during some forgotten festival, children splashing nearby while elders watched from the steps above. One quirky feature catches your eye, a small niche set into the wall just above the lowest step. Inside sits a worn figurine, perhaps left as an offering to ensure the well never ran dry. You touch the figurine lightly, feeling the smoothness of its surface, and wonder how many hands have done the same, silently thanking it for the water it once gave. Historians still debate whether stepwells like this one served purely practical purposes, or if they doubled as sacred spaces where the people of the city connected with their gods and with one another. You sit for a moment on the lowest step, letting the cool air wrap around you. Above, the last streaks of orange sky are fading to deep blue. A few stars have begun to flicker into view. You take a deep breath and stand, climbing the steps slowly, feeling the weight of the day and of the city settle into your bones. When you reach the top, you glance back one last time, and the darkness below seems to shimmer faintly, as though the water is still there, waiting for someone to draw it up again. You turn and walk into the square, the city now bathed in twilight. The air is cooler, quieter, but alive with memory. You can almost feel the stories of the streets, the wells, the baths, the workshops still pulsing in the bricks around you, whispers of ingenuity and care, of laughter and labor, of rituals and resilience. And as you make your way back through the streets, you can't help but smile at the thought that so many of these forgotten inventions, drains and beads, bricks and baths, wells and wheels still work, still whisper, still wait for us to remember them. You find a quiet spot on the edge of the city, sit down on a low wall and look out over the rooftops, the faint glow of moonlight spilling over the bricks. And you feel it, the heartbeat of a civilization that never really stopped. Your eyes grow heavy now, and the cool night air begins to settle around you like a soft blanket. The faint rustle of distant leaves and the whisper of stone against stone stretch into a slow, soothing rhythm. The streets below you, still and dark, seem to glow faintly under the stars, each brick a quiet ember of memory. You let your breath slow, the hum of the ancient city lulling you into stillness. You picture the calm water in the stepwell, the faint scent of clay and earth, the soft echo of footsteps on forgotten stairs, all fading into a gentle hush. The inventions you've touched tonight, the beads and baths, the drains and wheels, blur into one long, graceful thread, weaving through your thoughts like a quiet dream. And as the last bit of warmth leaves the stones beneath you, you close your eyes and let yourself drift, carried on the quiet murmur of a city that never truly sleeps, waiting patiently for you to return. Sweet dreams.